Okay, here we are in session number 2 of the Crash Course in Torah. And now we're going to cover an overview of the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Torah. And we said in the first session that it deals primarily with the family of Israel. It starts with the development of mankind, as we'll see. But the focus of the book really is about developing a family called Israel, which settles in the land of Egypt. Now we're going to divide Genesis into 2 sections. The first 2 parshas cover the first 20 generations of mankind. First 20 generations of mankind. Mankind's going to grow, develop from Adam and Eve, and then there's going to be a moral decline, which we're going to go through. Then, really beginning in Parsha 3 through 12, the next 10 Parshas, all the way down, are going to cover the 4 generations of Abraham's family. Abraham is introduced right at the very end of the second Parsha, but we don't really get to see him full force until the beginning of the third Parsha, when he begins his first major test. So we have 20 generations in the first 2 Parshas, and then the 4 generations of Abraham's family in the next 10 parshas. Now the Torah opens with a story of creation in 6 days. This is the run through. Day 1, creation of light. Day 2 is the sky, which isn't the sky as we know it. It's a more technically called a firmament, which was a separation between upper heavenly waters and lower waters. Day 3 is the seas, the earth, and the vegetation. Day 4 is the sun, moon, and stars. And it's a good thing to point out here that obviously, when we're talking about days, it's a different concept of a day, because if the sun and moon and stars weren't created until the 4th day, then what were the first 3 days without them? Day 5 is the fish and the birds. Day 6 is animals. And then the crowning creation, which is man. And he's mandated to be fruitful, multiply, fill up the earth, rule over all species, and dominate. And day 7 is the Sabbath day, when God blesses the 7th day of rest and he makes it holy. So those are the 6 days of creation. Now, back in those 20 generations, so we have 4 major events of decline once the world gets started. So the first thing is we have the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Adam is placed in the Garden of Eden, a beautiful place. He's told to work it and keep it. He can eat from every tree except for one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He's told by God that if he eats from that tree, he will die, which doesn't mean he's literally going to die at that moment, but he'll become a species that is now mortal. Well, then God says it's not good for man to be alone. He has him name the animals, and naming the animals, Adam realizes he doesn't have his own mate, so God puts him to sleep. The woman is created, and then the snake comes along and convinces the woman to eat from the tree. She feeds Adam, and they are cursed. The snake is cursed, the woman was cursed, and the earth became cursed because of Adam, and they are banished from the garden to work the earth from which he came, and eventually he'll return to dust. So that's the whole story of the Garden of Eden. Then they have 2 sons, Cain and Abel. This is also in the first Parsha. Cain was a farmer and Abel was a shepherd. Now, the way I remember Abel was a shepherd, because in Hebrew, Abel, Hevel, means futile, pointless. And Abel said it was pointless to work with the earth because it had been cursed because of their father, Adam. So he became a shepherd. Well, Cain and Abel, they both bring offerings to God. Abel brings his best. God prefers Abel's. Cain gets jealous and he kills his brother Abel. And that's when God comes to him and asks where Abel is. And Cain responds with the famous words, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And he gets cursed. He's going to be a wanderer over the face of the earth. Cain will never find any place to settle. Then, by the end of that first Parsha, all still over here in the beginning of the first Parsha, over here, 10 generations pass, mankind has become so corrupt. There's intermingling of the species, there's rampant theft and disrespect for personal property, so God decrees to bring a flood. And in Parsha 2, we have the story of the flood. We know everybody is going to get wiped out that walks the face of the earth except for one man, Noah, and his 3 sons, his wife, their 3 wives, and all the different animals and species will enter the ark with him to see the second civilization. Now, it's interesting, when I ask people how long the flood is, many people say 40 days and 40 nights, which is how long it rained for, but the flood was actually 1 year. The ark was on the waters for an entire year. Well, eventually the waters subside, they come out, and the world has changed dramatically. I just want to point some of the changes between the world before and after the flood. After the flood, man's lifespan was diminished now to 120. Before the flood, he was living for centuries. Also, seasons were introduced. Before the flood, there was a temperate, beautiful environment. Now, seasons are introduced, and tradition says, in part, that was to sensitize man to the passage of time and his own mortality. Also, the blessing for Noah has changed. Now it's only to fill up the earth, but there's no conquering the earth. 4, they can eat meat. Before the flood, they can only eat vegetation. And the 5th change is the rainbow is put in the sky as a sign that God won't bring a global flood in the entire world again. So many changes after the flood. While a few generations after the flood, mankind is traveling to a valley called Shinar, and there they build this massive tower. It becomes known as the Tower of Babel. Their plan was they wanted to settle all together, make a huge city and tower that would reach the skies, and the tradition says they would fight a war against God. And the Torah says mankind only spoke one language, which tradition teaches was Hebrew. So there was this tremendous potential for unity, and they're using it now to fight God. So God scatters them, and we have the emergence of 70 different nations that now populate the world that can no longer communicate and get along well together. That's the background until we have the beginning of Abraham and his family. Now, I mentioned 20 generations. I just want to point out the first generation obviously is Adam. A 10th generation descendant of Adam was Noah, and a 10th generation descendant of Noah was Abraham. Adam and Noah never met, but actually Abraham lived during the time of Noah. He was 58 years old when Noah passed away. So that's the background on what's happening with mankind. And now beginning really at the end of the second part, Abraham's introduced, but really here we're going to get into what Abraham's all about and his life story. So let's do a little review. And I always like to leave time at the end to do a quick review. So when you want to review this, you don't have to go through the whole presentation. If you just want to get down the material well, you can just spend a little time on this last section here and play it over, and that way you can get this material down and mastered. So here goes. Let's fade out all this material, and here we go. All right, Genesis has 12 parshas, deals with the family of Israel, divided into 2 sections. The first 2 parshas cover how many generations? We now know it's 20. And the next 10 parshas cover 4 generations of Abraham's family, 4 major events of decline, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Parsha 2 is the story of the flood, which lasted 1 year. And then we have the story of the Tower of Babel and the emergence of 70 different nations. So I'd suggest you review this last section to make sure you have it clear. And then the next section, we're going to go through the 4 generations of Abraham's family and learn about the founding fathers and mothers, the patriarchs and matriarchs of the Jewish people.